Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River Valley in Southern Oregon with the most amazing Secret of Light discussion group to discuss Alice Bailey's A Treatise on White Magic and also to correlate it to Walter Russell's ideas of the wave and waveform mechanics. Today we have our panel, and as you can see, Brian with his Truth and Love shirt is actually in my backyard currently, in the back of my property, and enjoying the outdoors. He's given me the idea that maybe I should do more broadcasts from the backyard, but again, we had to mute Brian because we had too many animal noises coming from the backyard. So for right now, we are going to begin our discussion on the Treatise on White Magic. This is part 2 of Rule 5. We'll probably have a third part, maybe even a fourth part of Rule 5. It's a very intense rule within the book of Treatise on White Magic by Alice Bailey, as we talked about before. And this is a continuation of our discussion last week, where we talked a little bit about thought forms, the collective unconscious, and began to talk a little bit about chakras. Today, we're going to get actually more in depth into the eye, the throat, and the heart, and how does that correlate to our experience and our opening process of our bodies to the idea of ensouling the soul within our body rather than working just out of the personality, as Alice Bailey calls it, and what Walter Russell would call the physical man or the animal man. So with that, as we all have seen it maybe in the past, if you watch some of my previous videos, we always start with a little collage, which serves as a thumbnail for the YouTube video. But it also, like I say, if we see a picture paints 1,000 words. We can hold these forms maybe in our minds as we begin to read and look at what Bailey says in her book, and then begin to correlate that to ourselves and our own individuality, but have a form also placed to begin to have that embodied within our senses and just not in our mind. So what we're going to begin with is I'm going to read Rule 5 again. So this is 3 things engage the solar angel, which is our higher self, before the sheath of the one who thus creates, which is ourselves, and steady contemplation. Thus, the heart, the throat, and the eye are applied for triple service. Looks like Giselle can't join due to no internet. So with this Rule 5, today we're really going to concentrate on the heart, the throat, and the eye. And with that, I pulled up some images of the heart as an electromagnetic field of the heart, which creates this vortex that we've talked about, this toroidal field that comes from the heart. The people that I follow don't believe that the heart is the pump of the body. The vascular system actually moves the blood through contraction and expansion, and to move the blood, the heart is really the main electrical generator of the body, creating this toroidal field through electromagnetics. So that we're going to talk a bit about the heart chakra and how it relates to the electromagnetic biofield. We're also going to talk a bit about the eye and how the eye has 2 polarities, just as the heart, which causes this electromagnetic field. Within Russell's work, he talks about here in the center here, he talks about the wave, that there are 2 aspects to the wave. There's a positive, which is male, and there's a negative, which is female. He calls the positive father or hot, and he calls the negative mother, cold, female. And so within these waveforms go through the eye, and they go through all the organs. And oftentimes, from what Berlando of Alphabetics says, is that we only use one of the polarities to actually see, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Below here, this is a picture from the movie Dune with A Treatise. Since I couldn't really find a good picture of a throat chakra in action, within the movie Dune, they talk about the voice and using the spice to create the voice and to create the power from the throat, the power of the throat. So I put this image up to kind of get the idea that the throat and the throat chakra can be destructive, but it can also be a creating mechanism because of the vibrational output. So this is Paul riding the worm with the voice here in this little voice box, which he has. That's what he uses for the power of the voice. And as a child, he was designated as someone who could actually hold this power of the voice and create with the voice, and the voice would actually free the people. Here, what you're seeing is another toroidal field, but this picture comes from the book Biological Ionization. And within biological ionization, they show these toroidal fields, which are basically these toroidal fields as the idea of the positive and the alkalinity and the acidic. So this is the acidic, and the alkalinity is the other way. And so this is actually correlating how these toroidal fields come into the body. And so within biological ionization, that's really the basis of terrain theory versus germ theory. So within biological ionization, the idea of this toroidal field within the body is the basis for terrain theory, and how the pH and the elements begin to form and bring into existence, as we talked about earlier with Alice Bailey, that our bodies are an attractor for different consciousnesses of molecules, atoms, molecules, cells, and so on, each being sentient, but being brought together by our consciousness and our energy force field. Any questions before I move on to the discussion or comments? All right. What?
The field stuff is great. If you haven't watched Jason Brescia's yet,
No.
I mean, he actually gets into that, how we're in like two things.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own field, and we're in the, whatchamacallit field, the collective field.
Yeah, exactly.
He says it so wonderfully. I think you'd like him.
Okay. So put the link in the chat, and we can publish that. So, what we're going to talk about now is the heart, throat, and eye chakra from A Treatise on White Magic. So this is a continuation from chapter 5. So later, when the knowledge here conveyed is assimilated, the aspirant, which is us, we can be called the student or aspirant, will come to an understanding of the true meaning of the heart, the throat, and the eye, which is the effect of the guides of the race to stimulate into functioning activity at this time. We will therefore consider now. So we're going to consider these three things, and what Bailey's saying, that there are what we would call guides to the race. And this is the idea that there are masters within the theosophical paradigm. There are guides, and there are such as the ascended masters. And so, the idea is that there are entities or powers that are guiding our race. I get into this a little bit if anyone wants to watch my series on spiritual sovereignty. I talk a bit about what the theosophical ideas and concepts are of these guides and how they work within not only the theosophical tradition, which is kind of a Vedic tradition, but also within Christianity and within Greek and different forms of ancient paradigms that actually begin to talk about the idea of these guides and the one-eyed giants and different things that are brought forth in quite a few teachings. Any questions before I go on to what these are or comments? All right. So the heart center, the throat center, and the center between the eyes. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about their awakening and coordination. To what use they will be put in the coming new cycle. This subject is of vital importance to the modern aspirant, for the mechanism of the heart, the throat, and the eye, constituting part of the inner structure which he must learn to use, has to be mastered and consciously employed by him before any true creative work is possible. When I use the words, and again, this is Bailey speaking, when I use the words creative work, I am speaking esoterically. And esoterically is innerly, not exoterically, which is outer. I am speaking esoterically, and I'm not referring to the valuable work done by the artists of the world in their many lines of expression. Their efforts to the seer are indicative of an inner stirring, of an inner coordination and a motivated activity, which will lead to true esoteric endeavor to creative work on the subtler planes. Now, for those who follow Russell, Russell was an artist, he was a sculptor, he was a painter, he was an architect, and he states in his books that this is how he was able to create all these masterpieces, was that he went into a knowing, into an area where he was being motivated and led by these esoteric ideas and concepts of knowing, and that source was guiding his hands within the creative work that he was doing. So this, again, is within Russell's ideas and statements. He said that all great geniuses work from this area. They work from the area of inner knowing, not external knowledge. So once we can begin to enlighten, to engage these sinners and begin to get into the knowing, we can actually begin to create works of art that are genius. And that is within what Walter Russell was talking about. And we also talked about this idea of cosmic consciousness, which Russell has a chapter on, but which is also brought forth by others in the idea that there is a higher knowing. Let us, for the sake of clarity, list these lotuses with their petal numbers and their location. Their colors are immaterial at present from the standpoint of the student, for much that has been given out is erroneous or in the nature of a blind, and in any case, the esoteric colors are widely different from the exoteric. So again, we're talking about esoteric inner things. The exoteric would be the outer body or the exterior. So Bailey in this is actually comparing the chakras to lotus flowers, and the number of the petals is indicative of the chakra itself. So what is she saying here is the base of the spine, which is down here, which is the root chakra, is 4 petals. The sacral center is 6 petals, right? We're talking this area here, the orange, kind of the sexual area. The solar plexus centers is 10 petals, which is the yellow here, the solar plexus. The heart center here is being shown as green, and it has 12 petals. The throat center, which is here, would have 16 petals. The center between the eyebrows would have 2, which is the 2 petals, which is really the positive, negative poles, and we have 2 eyes. And then the head center above here, which is the crown chakra, has 1,000 petals. Again, this is within Bailey's cosmology and within the theosophical vein of study. Any questions on what we've talked about within the chakras or petals or any of that?
Yes, I have a question, Will. What's the scale of the petals? Does it mean, is there a scale? Like, you go from 2 for the third eye to 1,000 for the head?
Again, I think it's more of, as we've had, if Cosmic Sojourner was here, he would say that everything is number, right? Mm-hmm. And so the numbers have a resonance and they have a relation to a frequency. So okay, that may be the frequency in which these energies are brought in on, and they can relate to, you would kind of think the head center, the crown chakra, would have the most, but they do, as you can see, they go from 10 to 12 to 16 to 2 for the eyes, right? Because we have 2 of them to 1,000. So there is, 12, 16s, right?
Yeah.
These numbers that are relating.
Okay.
So now that we've kind of discussed the chakras and the petal system, what we're going to talk about here is quite a few different things. So next, let the student remember 2 important facts, which may be regarded as elementary and preliminary, but which nevertheless have to be worked out into conscious realization and become part of the purposed intent of the aspirant's training. It is easy to generalize. It is difficult to realize. It is simple to grasp the information, intellectual data regarding the centers of force. It is most difficult to bring about the rearrangement of the forces flowing through these vortices and to learn to function consciously through the higher centers, subordinating the lower ones. This has to be done also without laying the emphasis upon the form aspect, as in the case in many practices used to vitalize the centers. So what this is saying, is that we have to change the focus from these lower centers, which is how we've been living, as what Walter Russell may say again as the electric man, the thinking body, the thinking man. And these are really where a lot of the innate, or as Bruce Lipton would say, the epigenetics lie within these areas and within these sacred centers. So what we're going to do is look at a bit about that in terms of how we can really subordinate these lower centers to the higher centers. So the lower centers are what control the personality or the physical man, to where the higher centers are what control or relate to the spiritual or soul man. So the two facts of importance are the three centers below the diaphragm. So the three, as we talked about, the base of the spine, the sacral center, and the solar plex center. Those are below the diaphragm. So if you took the body and divided it in half, above kind of, say below the breasts, you would have the lower, and then above that would be considered the higher. So below the diaphragm, which are at present the most potent in average humanity and the most alive, require to be reorganized, reoriented, and to be brought from a state of positivity into that of negativity. Equally, the four centers above the diaphragm, the heart center, the throat center, the center between the eyebrows, and the head center, must be awakened and brought from a state of negativity into that of positivity. So what I want to do here before we get into what that actually means, I kind of want to review a little bit about Alice Bailey's definition of positive and negative, and that with Walter Russell's, and that with yin and yang of Chinese medicine and so on. So within Bailey's, her definition of spirit, right, which is the idea of the animation force, is life, is father, which we'd say male, right, is positive, is red in Walter Russell, and is darkness. On the other side of that, we would have matter, which is the 3D matter that we see, that we feel, that we touch in the 3D. We would have form, we would have mother, we would have negative, we would have female, we would have blue, and we would have light. Within Walter Russell's definition, he would call this gravitation and radiation. So under gravitation, again, we would have life, we would have father, we'd have positive. But where this would differ is that Walter Russell would say that the gravitation is light and hot, to where Bailey's definition is darkness. And then for the mother side, we'd have radiation, we'd have death, we'd have mother, we'd have negative, and we would have red, female, cold, dark. So these are a little bit differentiations between the work of Bailey and the work of Russell. Within the yin yang, we would call the yang the active, the male, the dry, the light, the hot. The yin would be passive, female, wet, cold, dark. So within Walter Russell's definition, it is more in alignment, at least on the darkness light side, with the Chinese concepts, and Bailey would differ within the darkness and light. So within that, it's saying here that these lower centers, these centers which most humans, as Walter Russell would agree with also, are working out of their lower chakras. So, they're being driven, as he would say, by the animal man. And so this is where we experience hunger, and we experience want, and we, and experience sex. And these then can become perverted into, scarcity, into greed, into gluttony, into, sexual amorous, into jealousy and things like that, that can all be created within the man, within his thinking self, as these chakras that he has in the lower half of his body are what run him. He's being run by his desires, by his needs, and so on, by his fears, and is not really into his upper chakras. And so the reason for that is that they are in a state of positivity, and they must be digressed into a state of negativity. And we're talking about within the wave itself. On the other hand, the upper chakras have to do the opposite. They must be brought from a state of negativity into that of positivity. And let's look a little bit about what Walter Russell said about that within his law, which is the law: in any wave, the inductive current seeks the highest pressure at the apex at its core of energy, and the conductive current seeks the low. So when we talk about induction, we're talking about the positive side of the wave. Again, the life, the father, the positive, the light is the induction side. And the conduction side would be the death, the mother, the negative, the cold. What Walter Russell states is that as we reach these higher apexes of the negative and positive waves, this is the point of the greatest potential, the intense pressure of high potential. And then you have the intense pressure of high potential over here. So the highest potential is on the fringes of the wave, with the 0 point being release pressure of low potential. So within this, we're seeing this idea of this wave movement of, we have induction minus. And so there is two aspects to this wave. This wave is within our bodies. This wave is showing itself as positivity or negativity in our chakras. We must reverse the polarities. What Bailey's saying is we must reverse those polarities in order to ignite or enforce these higher chakras. Because what does positivity do? It attracts. So we now want to attract with our higher chakras. And what does negativity do? Right? Negativity repels. So we want to get to where our lower chakras are repelling some of these forces that are driving us, and begin to create induction into our higher chakras to begin to bring things toward us that are of a spiritual nature, of the higher chakra, rather than bring things to us which are the lower chakra, which is where we've been living, where man has been living for the past, millennial, who knows, how long we've actually been living in that state. So any questions before I move on between this induction and conduction, the wave, the chakras, and the purpose for trying to ignite the higher and repress, in some senses, not repress, but have them be more repellent to some of the energies and to what we're feeling in this current energy.
I have a question.
Okay.
You don't think that the current atmosphere of tyranny and socialism is possibly affecting people more than back when she was writing this?
Well, again, don't forget that when she was writing this was World War I, which was one of the most horrible wars, right?
It was before the end of World War II.
Yeah, when she was writing this, but this, that World War II was a hellacious war, right? I mean, so
I think there was a big change after World War II.
but there's a big change in food, right, and environment. It's a different. So, and we've evolved also as humans, right? This is what Steiner talks about. So we have a different consciousness and body, and so there's a lot of factors. Is it worse or better? I think it's different for sure. I don't like, as you know, I don't like saying what's worse and what's better. But I do believe that we were on a different cycle in the wave then. After World War II is where a lot of people actually begin to fall away from some spiritual concepts. They were moving away a lot from, the ideas of church and family and other things. And so that there was a definite trend in a change in the epoch or era that these energies were coming into. And I do believe, yeah, and then we have more TV now, which we didn't have then. We had set, the internet has brought even more of that into us now. So we're actually, what really was Twitter and, social media about? It was to get rooted in the lower chakras. It's Facebook, right? I want to see your face. I want to see your personality. I want to see, I don't want to know your spiritual ideas. I just want to know, what you are physically. So I think that, yes, I do think that we probably did have more reinforcement from, the areas that we were concentrating on more. We got out of nature, got into rooms, and began to look at screens of, that promoted the physical and the scientific.
But now we're waking up.
Yeah.
It seems like it anyway.
Correct. So, yeah, it's a great observation. So let's kind of walk down a little rabbit trail here as we talk about the heart and the throat. And this is the concept that Berlando has brought forth. So all organs have two polarities, both positive and negative. Humans use only one polarity and do not have eyes to truly see. And so what I'm saying here is that we, as in the wave, we have the gravitational wave coming in and we have the radiational wave going out, but we only see on one polarity. And the idea is that if we can actually see through the other polarity, we would not need our eyes to see. There's people who can read, this is a photo of a young man who is reading blindfolded. They talk about this some in martial arts, that you can blindfold and you can see. There's also someone, I think, who was from Hawaii, I forget his name, but he was talking about how he had such bad cataracts that he couldn't see, but he could read through changing the polarity of his eyes and seeing through a different way. So, we see the eye here, we have a positive and negative polarity to it. Which polarity do we view from? This is a image from Walter Russell of the wave and how, images are formed and so on. So the idea that we only use one polarity, as we begin to switch polarities within our chakras, we may be able to take advantage of this other polarity and begin to see in different ways, begin to see more things, begin to see into dimensions that our resonance and our light spectrum don't reach into, because we have a very narrow spectrum of light that we see from. And our world may change as we begin to change our polarities within these chakras. So as Jesus said in Mark 8:18, you have eyes, cannot you see? You have ears, cannot you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? Right? So the idea is, why would you say you have eyes and cannot see? Right? Are you blind or what? You have ears and cannot hear? Don't you remember anything at all? What's he talking about? What is it that we need to remember in order to create these eyes that can see and these ears that can hear? Right? Well, we need to remember who we are, that we're divine creatures. We need to realize that we are the greatest, generator of 3D reality. We're manifestors. We are transmuters. We are such powerful beings. That's what we need to remember. We need to remember the I am of ourselves, so that we can begin to create through our soul selves the life and the beauty and the abundance that is set forth in the universe for us. So that's what we need to remember. And once we can remember that, then we can begin to see and actually hear with our true ears and our true eyes. Any comments on what I just said regarding those aspects?
Edith Stan with her, what are they called? Children?
Yeah,
children.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and then we talked about that last week. And yeah, if anybody has a chance, Dr. E has a wonderful channel. Brian visits her quite often. And it's a new way of learning, because one thing that Walter Russell stated that Newton, who had the theory of gravity, only perceived half of the wave in his theory of gravity. So he saw the apple fall to the earth, but he didn't continue with the wave, with the radiation of the wave, which was the apple decaying and going back up.
Yep.
And so that's when we only use one polarity of the wave of our eyes. We only see half of the picture, at least, right? There's much more of the picture to see. So the idea that we can actually, begin to maybe see the other half of the wave is when we actually will begin to open up and begin to get these chakras into a state of use. So as we look at the heart, throat, and eye, these are some of the images from the front, from the collage, in which we actually see, the base of the neck to the base of the spine here with a vortex, right, with this triangle, and as they meet, within the middle here, within the heart, that's where the vortex is created, which we talked about. And here's from the front, so from, basically the root here to the base of the skull, from the third eye down. This is the vortex. And again, here's the entire picture that I showed in the front from the biological ionization book. And I gave, there's a video I have out there called The King Priest Archetypes, in which I actually discussed this idea of this vortex from biological ionization, where the alkaline, the negative, the yang, the female, so the female's alkaline, it's negative, it's yang, and the acidic is the acidic, the positive, the yin, the male. And if you look at actually the body, and within acupuncture, going through this area of the center, which we're going to call the belly button, the center of creation, how it corresponds with the human body, and within these ideas of the Tantian Qi Chong and the Ming Min, the Tantian being the belly button, the Tantian being the back here, of how that correlates with this biological ionization model, which I, in the video, talk about the centering point, the Christ, the Melchizedek, and so on, and then how this, as we go into these higher spiritual realms and lower spiritual realms, how that kind of correlates with Christianity and anthroposophy. And I have the picture here of a Tasmanian devil kind of being the vortex, the concept of the vortex that's actually acting within us. So these concepts of this vortex are throughout many cultures, throughout this biological ionization. It's within the Chinese, it's within the Ayurvedic, and within actually science today. Heart Math Institute, Bruce Lipton, and so on, talk a lot about this idea of this heart and vortex. Excuse me?
Solar plexus?
No, this is at the heart. This would be more of the solar plexus here at the center line here. So
you're not referring to the solar plexus then?
Yeah, no. So this right here is really the heart vortex, but this is kind of the centering idea that within between these two polarities, right? Because we'd have Ahriman and Lucifer. We have the Christ consciousness, which holds these two powers, which the Luciferic is the idea that we want to go to the highest heavens. The Ahrimanic is that we want to go to the deepest hells. And the Christ consciousness holds us on the plane of existence in the centering force.
That's not the solar plexus to you in the middle there?
Yeah, well, it's the belly button, which, it's kind of between the solar plexus and the sacral. Sacral's a little bit lower. So it's at the area of the creation, right? The area where your umbilical cord comes into.
Yeah, right. I thought that was, isn't that what they do in judo and yogi?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess solar plexus is the best definition for it. So this is the idea that within this is where we hold these two tensions within the Christ consciousness or the cosmic consciousness that's spoken about by Russell. So let's get back now to some of Bailey's work. And the reason I kind of gave these other ideas and concepts was to give a visual about some of the other systems and maybe make it more personal to your body and to your own journey. So this has to be brought about in two ways, right? This is how we're going to activate our chakras, how we're going to change the polarity. First, by the transference of the positive energy of the lower centers into that of the higher. And secondly, by awakening of the head center by the demonstration of the activity of the will. The first effect is produced by character building and by purification of the bodies. So this is how you're going to begin to transfer the positivity of the lower to the upper. And this is by getting our bodies cleaner, by purification of the body and character building, right thinking. You know, to begin to build character and right thinking is going to begin to transfer this negativity, the positivity into the negativity of the higher chakras, as used by the soul in the three worlds. The second, and again, the three worlds would be body, soul, spirit, body, and soul. The second is a result of meditation, because we talked about meditation, and the development of organized purpose imposed by the will upon the daily life. Character building, clean living, controlled emotional reactions, and the development of organized platitudes of all religions have lost weight from our very familiarity with them. It's not easy to remember that as we live purely and rightly, we are verily and indeed working with forces, subjecting energies to our needs, subordinating elemental lives to the requirements of spiritual being, and bringing into activity a mechanism and a virtual vital structure which has hereto been only latent and quiescent, meaning it's been repressed. Nevertheless, it remains a fact that when the energies latent at the base of the spine are carried to the head and brought via the solar plexus, that clearinghouse of energy of the medulla oblongata, to the center between the eyebrows, then the personality, the matter aspect, reaches its apotheosis, and the Virgin Mary and the individual sense, which is a finite parallel of an infinite reality, is carried up into heaven, here to sit at the side of her Son, the Christ, the soul. So the idea here is Kundalini, right? From the base of the soul, base of the spine, as we travel up the spine into our higher chakras, this energy is developed, and it's developed through right living. There is something we must do. We must change into a being that has thoughts that are much more right thinking wise. And you know, for each person that may be different, but as it relates to the collective, it's more of like what within the collective consciousness is beneficial and what is beneficial for the individual. And so the idea that there may be a collective consciousness or unconsciousness, what are those aspects that are beneficial and not detrimental to that? So when the energies of the sacral center focused here there too on the work of physical creation and generation, therefore, the source of physical sex, life, and interest are sublimated, reoriented, and carried up to the throat center. Then the aspirant becomes a conscious creative force in the higher worlds. He enters within the veil and begins to create the pattern of things which will be brought about eventually the new heavens and the new earth. So within the ideas of Kundalini energy or sexual energy, you know, if that's not being used for procreation or for physical sex, how can that be controlled to be focused on other endeavors? So we're saying that the most powerful force in the universe that we can generate is of our sexual nature, of that idea of creative force. That energy that we have, if it stays in the lower chakra, will only be seen to be like, you know, sexual in nature, physical sex or whatever. If we begin to look at the higher chakras and actually say, there's this sexual energy that I'm going to sublimate to my higher chakras, and instead of just have it feed my interior desires of the personality, I am going to take that energy and move it into my higher centers to get supercharged, basically, from that energy in my higher chakras to bring the soul into a manifestation within my body. Any questions regarding the idea of using the sexual energy to create higher thought forms and activate our higher chakras? All right. When the energies of the solar plexus expression hitherto of the potent desire, nature, feeding the emotional life of the personality are equally transmuted and reoriented, then they are carried to the heart center, and there is brought about a result, a realization of group consciousness, of group love, and of group purpose. One of the keys here being group love. As we have a cosmic consciousness or this group collective consciousness, what is the basis of that consciousness? If it's based on love, right, as Walter Russell says, the foundation of the 3D reality is love, the element that we create with is light. If the group consciousness foundation is love and not control and suppression, then that group consciousness can actually access higher thought forms and higher states of being as they bring the soul consciousness into reality. When these three transfers have been consummated, then an activity transpires in the head center, the ultimate governing factor, and by an act of the will of the indwelling ruling soul, certain happenings take place, which we can consider later in our studies. Okay, so we're going to talk about that as we begin to practice this, and we're talking about the will, which Steiner talks about also, this willing, that through the act of the will, which is our desire to actually do this, an act of the will of the indwelling ruling soul, once this happens, certain happenings take place. And we're going to cover that later on in the book of what happenings actually take place. But there will be a transformation. It's almost as if you're doing, the reincarnation, the coming back into a form that's higher, kind of almost like Christ did on the cross with the transmutation, the ideas of that we are going to be born again within these new chakra system. We're going to transmute our bodies into a higher use of our higher versus our lower chakras. The second fact to bear in mind is that as these changes or reorientations take place, the disciple begins to awaken psychologically to new states of consciousness, to new states of existence, and to new states of being. It will be apparent, therefore, how necessary it is to go slowly in these matters, so that mental apprehension and ability to reason logically and sanely may parallel the growth of the intuition of the spiritual perception. There's a dialogue in the Bible when Paul is taken before the magistrates, and he says, "Much learning has made you insane." And what that can mean is that as we begin to develop this spiritually, if we don't bring up our other subtle bodies simultaneously or in coordination with that growth, we will become a babbling psychopath. We just will babble at the mouth. We won't really control, and then we will infuse emotion into that, which will make it more intense, which will then create thought forms that are not beneficial. So the idea is that as we begin to experience and I see this experience of new spirituality and energies coming into a lot of people. I get quite a few calls daily from people that are talking about how they feel they're going insane, how they're just on edge, they're so anxious, and what they're doing is as these energies are coming in, they are not developing their other subtle bodies or even their physical bodies. Their physical bodies are almost too weak to maintain the energies that are coming in because they're unhealthy, they're not exercising. And again, this vessel, this body is the vessel that has to hold those energies. It has to be the container for holding these energies. That's why Bailey talked earlier that the purification of the body, to begin to get the body healthy again, to get it back to a state of well-being and not dis-ease. And that takes some time and some effort. And, you know, so the more that we begin to work our bodies physically, the more we begin to get healthy in mind and body, then we can actually begin to parallel the growth of this spiritual growth that's happening also. But just to do the spiritual growth would actually might be seen as would cause apprehension and an inability to reason logically and sanely. So if we don't develop all these at the same time, it can lead to psychosis or other ideas that would be seen as detrimental. So it is not possible for the aspirant, which is us, the people working on the student, to work with and utilize all these 7 types of energy intelligently in the early stages of the path of discipleship. The emphasis for training purposes is laid down on only 3 of them. These are the 3 that we should be concentrating on. That of will, strength of power, through the medium of the head center. This is the energy of the spiritual man and comes directly from the monad via the soul. So once we are actually taking our solar angel and accessing soul, we are now the spiritual man. Up to the 3rd initiation, however, all that the disciple needs to grasp is that the will aspect of the soul should control the personality via the mental body to the head center. When this is the case, the 1,000-petal lotus begins to function. The line of the stream of force is, but we're going to talk a little bit about this stream of force, but what this is saying is that where the mental body is not the thinking mind. We have to be very clear on this. This is what Walter Russell talks a lot about, is that we think our thinking mind is our mind, and that's not the mental plane. Our mental plane is to use our mental factors from the soul, which is not the thinking electric mind, which is from our animal mind. Once we get out of the animal mind, that's really the part that we're talking about here, is the personality. We have to develop our mind into right thinking, which is thinking using source through this monadic process to get rid of that, what we might call the ego mind, in the sense of that it's just really the animal mind, how to serve my body, how to serve myself, into this more spiritual mind of the mental plane and mental body. So we'll start with the monad, the atma, the spiritual will, the inner circle of petals in the egoic lotus, the will petals, the mental body, the head center in the etheric body, the nervous system and the brain. So there's things we can do for our nervous system and brain. We can take vitamin B, because a lot of us are deficient in that, to actually build our nervous system and get it calmed down. We can do meditation, which calms it down. There's, we can do anti-inflammatory type things that calm it down. But a lot of it has to do with our practices, our meditation practices, and what we're watching, what we're bringing into our eyes, what we're bringing into our ears. Next, that of love wisdom, through the medium of the heart. The center, when awakened, leads to the expansion of consciousness, which initiates a man into his group life. He loses a sense of separateness and finally emerges into a full life of realization, a realization of unity with his own indwelling God and all humanity, with all souls in all forms of nature, and so with the oversoul. This force stream comes likewise from the monad via the soul, and its line is as follows. So now we're going to talk a bit about this indwelling, that once we really realize, when people say, oh, I feel so alone, I feel lonesome, I feel, so separate. First of all, we have to realize that we are never alone, that we're never separate. God, source, Akashic intelligence is always with us. We are never alone. Then once we can begin to realize the concepts of that, then we begin to realize that God is in everyone, not just me, but everyone. God's the ocean, I'm a drop. There are many drops in the ocean. Those are all the individuals that are out there. Once I can realize that I am in the ocean of drops, I can then see the ocean as the collective. I am still a separate drop. I am still an individual, but my focus is not so much on my individuality, but on the oneness of God and of source and of the ocean. So then I can begin to work with that energy. So the monad is the booty, which is spiritual love, the intuition. So we have the spiritual love, which is the intuition. The second circle of petals is the egoic lotus, the love petals, the astral body. And the heart center is the bloodstream. So within these ideas of the intuition, which is spiritual love, the astral body, which travels at night, and the bloodstream, which the heart is the center, these are the factors that allow us to get these other chakras opened and transmuted from polarity. In the little evolved man, meaning the man who is really unconscious, right? As Walter Russell said, unaware. He didn't believe in the conscious, unconscious. He believed in either aware or unaware. So then they'll say the unaware man, this force stream simply passes through the heart center direct to the solar plexus and expends its two aspects of vital life and of soul quality, one energizing the bloodstream and the other awakening the solar plexus center. This then becomes the dominant factor in the energy life of the man, and the forces through which he desires nature express itself until such a time as the aspirant brings about the needed transmutation. And again, our channel is all about transmutation. That's what we are, the transmuters, and reorientation of his emotional desire nature. Then the heart awakens into activity and the life of the solar plexus center becomes subordinated to that of the heart. This is brought about by the development of group interests, by the cultivation of inclusive and steady loss. And there's some more down here. So what we're trying to say here is that as our higher chakras begin to be opened, the emphasis is taking off the lower chakras, which are the chakras which drive personality, and begin to be concentrated in the upper chakras, which embrace and bring in soul, so that we can perform white magic. When we're in our lower chakras, what are we performing? We're performing black magic, right? Dark magic, magic that's driven by the desires of our bodies, not of our solar selves. So again, this was the definition that Bailey gave of the difference between white and black magic. White magic was soul magic. Black magic was soul of the personality. Any questions or comments on what I just discussed with that? You're muted, Giselle.
Okay,
Chantal.
I'm back. So it looks like those three types of energies are the three of the seven rays, right?
Correct.
And how do you? How are we supposed to? To transform. I guess it's happening over many lives, right? Because when you incarnate in this body, some of the rays are dominant. They're not all present. So how does this work? Do you get me?
Yeah, again, he said these are the first three that we're going to,
right.
At the top it says, it is not possible for the aspirant to work and utilize all these seven types of energy, right? So right now, we're just going to concentrate on these three. As we begin to concentrate on these three, it will open us up to the remaining seven. Because within this, we're going to get back to Christ's words, which are, why don't you remember? As you begin to open these up, you are going to remember who you are and be able to actually embrace these other wave forms. So the idea is that we are very young in this process, right? We're the aspirants, we're the disciples, right? We don't really know what is being said here so much, but as we begin to go through this study and begin to practice what is being put forth here, we will begin to open our chakras and we will begin to experience new things that she talked about.
Okay.
Anything else before I move on? All righty. So third, that of active intelligence, of the energy which animates the form aspect and which creates form in line with its objective purposes of the preceding intelligence, God or man, human or divine. This also proceeds from the third aspect of the monad, and the line of its contact is. So that we're going to go through this third aspect of the intelligence. The monad, the manas, the spiritual intelligence, I call it akashic intelligence, the higher mind, the third or outer circle of petals in the egoic lotus, the knowledge petals, the etheric body as a whole, where we were talking about the astral body before, as it pervades the dense physical body, the throat center, the cells of the body. In the little evolved man, or in the unaware man, as in the case of the second aspect of its unfoldment, the energy simply passes through the throat center and goes directly to the sacral center, and thus brings into activity the generative process and creative faculties utilized in the reproductive work and sex life of the race. So as we begin to procreate, as we have our, as we have our life early where we procreate and do those things, we bring this energy in and it's used for procreation. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how we may take this sex energy of this energy that comes in through the sacral and begin to use it to engage our higher chakras. This is a broad and general outline of these three main streams of force or divine energy in their direction. The relationship of the head center to the base of the spine, where lies the sleeping fire, right? The Kundalini fire. We've talked about that in the past. There's some videos I've done on that. Will not be considered here, nor will the function of the solar plexus centering as a clearinghouse for the lower energies be touched upon. I am anxious for the students to simply grasp the idea and the skeleton of the teaching. Again, this is Bailey saying this, not me, but what she's really doing is just putting forth a framework right now, not to get too much into the details, down into the rabbit holes, because I'm sure some of us, and myself included, don't quite totally understand what she's talking about right now. So to go into depth would just be more confusing than enlightening. Every human being in the course of time works his way back on the path of return to one of the three major rays. So we're always going to work back towards these three major rays. All have eventually to express intelligent creativity, creative faculty, to be animated by divine love, and to bring into functioning activity the will as it works out divine purpose and plan. The first center which the aspirant seeks consciously to energize, and on which he concentrates during the early stages of his novative, is the heart center. He has to learn to be group conscious, to be sensitive to group ideas, and to be inclusive in his plans and concepts. He has to learn to love collectively and purely, and not be actuated by personality attraction and the motive of reward. Until there's awakening of the heart, he cannot be trusted to wield the creative powers of the throat center, for they would be subordinated to self-aggrandizement and ambitions of various kinds. So this is where we get into the idea of control and manipulation and self-seeking, and the ideas that these are what may be the cause of our current downfall, is that we have people that really are more concerned about how much money they're going to make, hoarding, that are going to go rape the resources of the planet, not thinking about, the 7 or 25 generation concepts of what the future will look like. So as we begin to work on this first one, the heart, right? This is what we talk about, that the heart chakra is not open. As we begin to work on the heart chakra, then we can get into a more right thinking. So that as we develop the power of polarities and the throat chakra, it will be creative rather than destructive. If we don't develop the heart chakra, then once we engage the throat chakra, we will be destructive and not, a benefit. We will be a detriment to humanity and the world around us and to all planes of existence. Any comments or questions before I move on? All right. So continue with the heart, throat, and eye. Here it should be noted that none of these unfoldments can ever be approached from the standpoint of complete static passivity or from the angle of an entirely new undertaking. We are in process of evolution. Certain aspects of our force centers are already awakened and functioning in relation to the form aspect, but are not yet expressed soul qualities. again, qualities. I have a video out on the physics of quality, in which we cover some of Ibrahim Karim's work. Qualities versus quantities. We talked a little bit about this last week. We have behind us a long and fruitful past. We are none of us purely selfish or separative. Human society is now cohesive and interdependent. Humanity as a whole has already done much in bringing the heart center into partial activity and in awakening some of the more important aspects of the throat center. So what she's saying is that, as we talked about earlier in some of the first things, that each of us, each aspirant, each disciple, each student is in different levels of evolution of where they are. So some of this may be difficult for some to understand, some it may be below them in terms of where they are, and some it may resonate completely. But each human is in a different area of evolution within their spiritual and physical bodies. And this is just part of the human condition, that throughout our history, we've had different people in different areas of evolution. And some are in de-evolution, right? They are devolving as we speak. They are becoming less and less human and becoming more and more zombified, or, say a robot versus a divine creature that is based on cosmic consciousness and the soul. So here it should be noted that it's the full. Okay, so it can't be passive. The problem with many aspirants today is that of the solar plexus, for it is wide open. And when I do a lot of my archetype ruler on people, I find a lot of issues with people and their solar plexus, for they are wide open. Actively functioning and almost fully awakened. The work of transmutation is, however, going on simultaneously, leading, as one might naturally suppose, to a good deal of difficulty and to chaotic conditions. The heart center is also beginning to vibrate, but is not yet awakened. The throat center is frequently prematurely awakened through the transfer of energy from the sacral center. This is due to several causes, sometimes to spiritual purposes and intent, but more frequently to a negation of the normal sex life. So if people don't have the normal sex life, they will transfer this to the throat chakra, owing to economic conditions or to a lack of physical vitality, which predisposes to celibacy. This lack of vital force is in turn due to many factors, but primarily to a long heredity producing a degeneracy of the physical body, or to enforced celibacy in past lives. This enforced celibacy was very often a result of monasticism and the living of the mystical life. When this creative awakening finds expression through any of the arts, literature, painting, music, or group organizations and executive work, there is no harm wrought, for the energy finds a normal creative outlet. These points should be remembered by the aspirant. He is facing a most complex problem. He enters blindly into a situation which is the result of a long evolutionary process into which he is not the key, especially in the early stages prior to the first initiation in this case, where he has no knowledge of the history of the past, nor any prevision as to the future. He has simply to take his equipment and his opportunity and do the best he can, guided by the age-old rules of Raja Yoga and the light of his own soul. So as we talk about this, what Alice Bailey is trying to convey is that we are not the person that sits here today only. We are the results of epigenetics, as what Bruce Lipton would call it, that we carry the hormonal within the DNA structure, the energy bodies. We could also say the karma of families and ourselves, of past lives. And all this can be brought back to within the ideas of sexuality and, what it takes to maintain sexual relations, normal sexual relations, which is back to a clean body. A lot of what we have with the ideas of male impotence and other things that are going on have to do with our food that we're eating, the lack of exercise, the lack of physical engagement, the use of, looking at pornography rather than actually having a right mind about the sex, looking at it as only physical and not of this spiritual vortex that's being created by two people when they come together, and the energies that are created and what kind of thought forms those produce. So within this energy, which, again, Wilhelm Reich, within his orgone generation machines, orgone came from the word orgasm. He knew that spiritual energy was very powerful and used in the correct manner. So the idea of Kundalini, of orgonite, of orgone, of Wilhelm Reich, of, even some of the early psychologists or psychiatrists, Freud, had his entire psychology theory based on the sexual life, and everything was driven by sex. Well, in the thinking man, I would say that's true. He's driven by his lower solar plexus. And so it's all driven by his sexual desire and his sexual intent. But again, that doesn't mean that's right thinking or that's the way that humans were meant to be. Once we become love-centered, heart-centered, we can not do away with, I'm not saying to be a eunuch or anything, but we begin to convert those energies into beneficial forms rather than just detrimental forms. I wouldn't even say detrimental, but forms that may not serve us. Again, one of my lines is all things are legal, but not all things are beneficial. So we can do anything we want, but whether or not they're going to be to our benefit is really the key in our decision making. And so what we want to do is this Raja Yoga, which is the light of our own souls. As the heart center is awakened and the throat center swings into creative work, a definitive relation is set up, and there is an interplay of energy between the two. This activity in its turn brings about a response from that aspect of the 1,000-petaled lotus, again, the crown chakra, through which the energy always animating the heart and throat centers normally passes. This responsive activity and interaction brings about two results, and this should be most carefully noted. First, the light in the heart makes its appearance. So first, we're going to see this light in the heart making its appearance. A sparkling, if I might so express it, is set up between the higher positive, overshadowing energy as it is centralized within the form of the 1,000-petaled lotus, and the steady, heightening vibration of the heart and throat centers, or lotuses. These two lower centers, in their turn, are responding to the energies being lifted and raised from the centers below the diaphragm. So the idea is we're taking this lower energy, supercharging our upper energy through our crown chakras, and beginning to feel this vibration in the heart and in the throat as they become awakened. And as she says, a sparkling. So you begin to see this sparkling, this tingling in the heart, as we begin to push this energy up into our higher and get the emphasis off the lower. Any questions about what we talked about within this idea of pushing this lower energy into the higher chakras? All right.
Yeah, I talked to you about Atkinson, I think. William
Yeah.
Atkinson.
Yes.
Yes. He had a very similar story. He called it lower self and higher self.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you have to control your lower self, that your higher self must take back the throne of the mind.
Yes. And I believe that Walter Russell said the same thing, was trying to convey the very same thing also.
Yeah. He's actually the guy who wrote the Kabbalion.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't give his name. He actually wrote the Kabbalion.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty wild
And so,
stuff.
and like I said, all these books that we have, right, all these systems that we have are based, I mean, when you get right down to them, they all are trying to convey pretty much the same concepts. And for us as humans, I mean, how many of us recognize that? And second, how many of us are doing the work to achieve that? And that's really what Bailey's trying to put forth, is a plan in which we can achieve it. So that's why I kind of like this study, because it does talk about this. Is it the end all? No. But it does bring forth valid concepts in which we can actually discuss and begin to maybe engage with to push these energies to a higher form. So secondly, the center between the eyebrows also begins to make its presence felt. This is the third eye. And this significant two-petaled lotus begins to vibrate. It symbolizes the work of at-oneing the soul and the body. So as we begin to bring this soul into our body, this at-oneing that is talking about bringing the two into one, the subjective and the objective. In some occult books, it's called the lotus with the 96 petals. This is only a differentiation dealing with the energies focused in the two petals. It will be noted that the sum total of the force petals in the centers, excluding the two head centers, amount to 48 petals. These energies in the two aspects of physical, vital energy, and soul qualities make up the 96 aspects of vibration of the two petals. The ajna or eyebrow center. It must be remembered also that the word petal only symbolizes an expression of force and its apparent effect in matter. So as we see this, we're talking about its apparent effect in matter. Walter Russell discussed the effect, that we concentrate too much on the effect in matter and not on the source of the cause. So as we get back into the soul, back into these higher centers and back into the crown chakra, we are now beginning to focus more on the cause and not just the effect in matter. The 5 centers with their 48 petals are synthesized, therefore, to 2-petaled lotus, and then we have 48 plus 2 equals 50. The number of perfected personality for 5 is the number of man, and 10 is that of perfection. So what Bailey's saying here is 5 is the number of man. Sometimes Christians may say 6 is the number of man, but how many fingers do we have, right? How many toes do we have? We have 5 and 5 of those, right? So that could be an area that there's differentiation between different types of theology. So this number signifies the 5 centers be added. So symbolically, also in the sum total of the 48 petals of the 5 centers added, the 96th petal of the center between the eyebrows, the number 144. 144 appears. This number signifies the completed work of the 12 creative hierarchies, 12 times 12, and thus bringing forth the add that of the number 1,000, the number of petals in the lotus of the head. And you have the number of the saved in the book of Revelation, the 144,000 who can stand before God. For the 3 ciphers which are found indicate the personality. When man has completed within himself the great work, and the number 144,000 is seen as symbolizing his point of attainment, then he can stand before God, standing not only before the angels of the presence, but before the very presence itself. So again, this is relating back to Christian cosmology, theology, whatever you want to call it, within the book of Revelations of the ideas of the 144,000, which is used and referred to for many different things, not just what Bailey's talking about here. This is just one more use of the 144,000. Whether this is true or that we need to stand before God, or we just actually understand who God is. This is a little bit, for my taste, it's again a little bit too, I would say, constraining for me at this point. But it's one concept. So any questions on what Bailey talks about here with the number of man, the 144,000, and striving to begin to incorporate so that we can actually stand before God or understand God or source?
Yeah.
All right. If there's no more questions or comments, we're going to wrap it up here at this point. Again, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River Valley in Southern Oregon with the phenomenal Secret of Light discussion group. Please like and subscribe. Please comment on the areas we've talked about today to give your input if you weren't able to join today. We always look forward to talking and to meeting and to expanding our consciousness and invigorating those higher chakras through the lower chakras. So thank you very much for attending today. Thank you very much for participating, and we'll see you next week.